From the very first meeting, my in-laws despised me, deemed me unworthy of their family. Yet my mother-in-law still sent me a message, inviting me to her lavish birthday party at the Argyle Country Club. On the way there, I stopped to help fix the car of a 70-year-old man. I arrived late, covered in grease and dirt. They treated me as if I wasn't even human. But then the old man's car, the one I had helped repair, pulled up, and what he said shook the very foundation of their real estate empire, the pride of my in-laws. My name is Brooklyn, a 29-year-old woman who works as a mechanic. I live with Nathan, my husband, in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Tacoma Park. Nathan is the head of engineering at a software company, hardworking, unpretentious, and always says he loves my authenticity. But my in-laws, Jeremiah and Raylan, are the complete opposite. They own a real estate business with projects all across Maryland, and they look down on my background and profession. I'm a mechanic, working at a garage near Gaithersburg, where my hands are always greasy, but my heart feels light after every successful repair. That morning, just after Nathan left for a 4-day business trip, I received a brief text from Raylan, my mother-in-law, inviting me to her birthday party at Argyle Country Club, a place foreign to me, where women wear silk dresses, talk investments, and no one knows how to change a tire. About an hour later, she called back. Her cold voice came through the phone. The party starts promptly at 6 p.m. Dress code is formal. I hope you'll fit the atmosphere that evening. I stayed silent for a few seconds, sensing the contempt hidden in every word. She didn't need to say it outright. She always found a way to remind me I didn't belong in their world. But I agreed to attend, not out of affection, but out of duty, because I'm Nathan's wife, and I don't want to embarrass him. When the call ended, I stood in our small living room, my eyes drifting over our simple belongings: the second-hand dining table, the cheap pine bookshelf, the slightly crooked wedding photo on the wall. I knew the Thompson family lived on a different level. They dealt in real estate, invested in resorts, drove luxury cars, and spoke the language of power. As for me, I earned an honest living with wrenches and grease. I opened my closet, skimmed past a few plain dresses, and chose the cream-colored linen dress I had worn on our second anniversary. I folded my faded fleece jacket and slipped a small gift I planned to buy into my bag. I knew that no matter how hard I tried, I'd always be the outsider in their eyes. But this time, I wasn't going to please anyone. I was going because I had a name in this family, and I would walk in as myself. I drove my old pickup truck, the wipers creaking against the windshield, to a nearby shopping center. Surrounded by dazzling lights and stores like Burberry and Chanel, I felt completely out of place. But I walked into Nordstrom, where I knew I could find a gift within my budget that still carried some grace. I chose a navy blue silk scarf, priced at $48. Not extravagant, but carefully wrapped. Holding it in my hand, I remembered the first time I met Raylan and Jeremiah, my in-laws, at a family dinner in an Italian restaurant. When they found out I was a mechanic, Jeremiah frowned, and Raylan gave a thin smile. Ah, a very practical job. They never hid their disappointment, even though Nathan once held my hand and said I was more capable than anyone he'd ever known. But their eyes never changed. They judged me by my background, by my calloused hands, by what they considered beneath them. I left Nordstrom, the small gift in hand, and drove toward Silver Spring, where the Thompson estate stood proud among the wealthy neighborhood. The sky was a cold gray, mirroring my mood. I thought about the cold remarks I'd soon hear, the scrutinizing glances that would fall on me. The imperfect daughter-in-law, without a dazzling dress, without a prestigious lineage. But I went anyway, because I'd learned that sometimes preserving one's dignity in silence is stronger than any retort. On the highway leading to Silver Spring, as I carefully navigated my old pickup among speeding luxury cars, I spotted a Rolls-Royce Phantom ahead, its black metallic paint gleaming even through streaks of mud, stopped on the shoulder, hood slightly ajar. There were no hazard signals, No cries for help, just an older man standing awkwardly by the road, phone in hand, apparently out of service. I steered over and pulled up in front. The wind lifted the hem of my dress as I stepped out and approached him. "Car trouble?" I asked. He turned, visibly surprised to see a grease-stained woman in Converse shoes and a worn denim jacket offering help. "I think it overheated or something. I'm not sure," he said, his voice calm but firm, someone who likely held managerial roles. I introduced myself. "I'm Brooklyn. I'm a mechanic. I can take a look if that's all right with you." He hesitated for a second, then nodded. "I'm Parker. Parker Sanders." That name meant nothing to me at the time. I opened the hood. Hot steam burst out and the smell of coolant hit me. I checked quickly, then turned to him. "I think it's a busted water pump. And belt. If you don't mind waiting about an hour and a half, I can patch it up enough to get you safely where you're going." He nodded, clearly impressed that I diagnosed the issue within minutes. "I'm also on my way to a party. My mother-in-law's birthday," I said casually, retrieving my toolbox from the truck bed. I saw him glance at my truck, then back at his Rolls-Royce and smile slightly, as if recognizing the irony in the moment. I started removing parts, my hands moving swiftly, every step etched into memory like I was working on some old Civic. He sat on a nearby cement barrier, watching me. "This party you're heading to doesn't sound very pleasant," he asked, his tone gently teasing but not intrusive. I gave a dry chuckle, still tightening bolts. "My husband's family is complicated. They're not too fond of me, especially since I fix cars for a living." I didn't dive into the details, just enough for him to understand. "And you? Off to a birthday as well?" I asked. He nodded, eyes distant. "For a woman I've known a long time, but it's more of a work thing." An unexpected connection formed between us. Me, with oil-streaked hands, and him. A man in a tailored suit, waiting for his six-figure car to be fixed by a girl his mother-in-law probably wouldn't let in the house. But amidst the clinking of tools and the soft breeze along the highway, something deeply human, deeply real, was happening. No pedigree, no status, no silk. Just two people, sitting under the sky, heading toward places neither of us truly wished to be. Almost an hour and a half passed. The sun began to dip westward, casting golden rays across the pavement. I wiped my hands with an old rag, closed the hood of the Rolls-Royce, and turned to Parker. "All done. It's not perfect, but it'll get you there safely. Just make sure to get the real parts replaced soon," I said, offering a small smile. He stood, looking both relieved and astonished. "I didn't think you'd actually pull it off. I've worked with dozens of engineers, and none of them handled a problem this fast in the middle of a highway." He pulled out his wallet, extending several $100 bills. "Please, take this. You've saved me from a real disaster." I shook my head and took a step back. "No need, really. Today, helping someone is enough." He looked at me for a long moment, then tucked his wallet away, his eyes contemplating something deeper. "Then, at least let me have your number. Who knows when I might need someone who can fix an engine and listen, too." I laughed. "Sure, but you have to promise not to call at midnight asking about spark plugs or existential crises." He laughed too. We exchanged numbers with a simple tap of our phones, but there was something real, something deeply human in that exchange. No business cards, no qualifications, no concern for who belonged to which class, just kindness, quiet and pure. Before getting in his car, he turned back and placed a hand on my truck door. "Brooklyn, you've made me believe that in a world built on calculation, there are still people who do good, not for praise, but because it's simply who they are." I smiled, nodded, and climbed into my truck. As I glanced in the rearview mirror, he was still standing there, in his immaculate suit beside his luxury car, but his expression was no longer that of a hardened investor. It was of a man who had just rediscovered something he thought he'd lost: faith. I started the engine, my hands still slightly trembling, not from fatigue, but from emotion. I knew I was running late to a party that probably no one wanted me to attend. And yet, strangely, I felt light. Because even if I was scorned by an entire family, at least today, I had done the right thing. And to me, sometimes that is worth more than any seat at a table draped in white linen. As I turned onto the cobblestone driveway leading to the Thompson estate, the first feeling that hit me was as if I had stepped into a completely different world: lawns trimmed in spirals, fountains glistening under the sunset, and parked out front were rows of luxury cars: Mercedes, Range Rovers, and an ivory Bentley that looked like it had been chosen to match the house's facade. I turned off the engine and sat still in the cabin of my pickup truck. My hands still smelled faintly of engine oil, my dress had smudges near the knees, and my hair was slightly disheveled after over an hour bent under a car. I looked down at the gift, the carefully wrapped silk scarf, tucked neatly inside a humble paper bag. I couldn't help but wonder, was I setting myself up for humiliation? But then I took a deep breath, opened the door, stood up, and walked up the marble steps toward a house I had never truly felt I belonged to. I rang the bell. After a moment, the walnut door swung open and Raylan appeared, in a shimmering silver cocktail dress, her hair perfectly pinned up, plum lipstick untouched even at the corners. She looked me up and down, her eyes narrowing as if she had spotted a fresh stain on a freshly scrubbed floor. "Brooklyn?" she said, her voice tinged with disbelief, like she couldn't trust her own ears. I offered a polite smile and held out the gift. "Happy birthday, Mother." Raylan didn't respond right away. She looked at the gift, then at me, and reluctantly accepted it as if handling some foreign object. Thank you." She stepped slightly to the side, still standing tall, not exactly making way. "Everyone's in the banquet room. Make yourself comfortable, like a guest." From the way she emphasized the word guest, I understood she didn't see me as family. Not a daughter-in-law. Not kin. Just an outsider accidentally included in the picture of opulence she was trying to preserve. I stepped inside, my canvas shoes letting out a faint squeak on the glossy stone floor. No one in the room turned to look. No one greeted me. Just the clinking of glasses, soft jazz music, and the subtle scent of expensive perfume lingering in the air. I knew all too well. Each glance flicked toward me from behind a wineglass. Each hushed murmur just loud enough to sting the chest. I didn't belong here. And more than that, they didn't want me here. But I stood tall, held my thin-lipped smile because I hadn't come to be liked. I had come to show them that no matter how they treated me, I would not shrink. I was standing near the buffet table, trying to follow a conversation about real estate prices in Georgetown, not understanding half the jargon they were using, when Jeremiah, my father-in-law, approached with a wineglass in hand, his gaze tilted with a trace of reproach. "Brooklyn, you're nearly an hour late. For older folks, punctuality is basic courtesy." Before I could respond, Raylan joined him, her eyes scanning me from head to toe like I was a stain that had found its way onto white leather. "And you chose this outfit for the party?" she said with a dry chuckle. "You know, at events like this, we represent the family." The word we rang hollow, entirely performative. I bit my lip in silence, my hand unconsciously clutching the strap of my bag. But they weren't finished. Jeremiah tilted his head, his voice lower now, but sharp as a blade. "It's been 5 years, and still no news. At your age, if you're not going to have children, the least you could do is try to fit in." I turned away, unwilling to cry in front of people who didn't deserve it. Nathan wasn't here. He was in Chicago, attending a tech conference. I was alone amid their judgment. No one stepped in. No one defended me. Raylan suddenly raised her voice, loud enough for those around to hear. I still don't understand. What goes through a mechanic's mind, hands covered in grease, walking into Argyle Country Club? This is a place for people who know how to behave, who know how to choose the right kind of people to sit beside. I turned back. Her eyes were cold and direct, like she wanted to erase me from the scene. The room froze. Those standing nearby said nothing, quietly stepping back, waiting, as if anticipating a fall. I knew I had become their entertainment, a cautionary exhibit to prove something about class. But what they didn't expect was I wasn't standing still anymore. You know, Mother, I began, voice low but clear. I may not wear designer clothes, I may not wear diamond rings, and I may not have an illustrious lineage, but I work with my hands. I don't look down on people for doing something small. I believe character isn't measured by business cards, but by how we treat those who have nothing to offer us. The room went silent. Raylan blinked, as if unaccustomed to being challenged. If my not having a child disappoints you, then I'm sorry, but I won't bear a child just to please someone, just as I don't need to live by the standards of someone who's never given me a sincere hug. I took a breath. I came here because I thought it was my duty, but today I realize duty should never come with humiliation. I looked around. No one spoke. No one offered support. But I didn't need it anymore. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind silence and chandeliers that no longer sparkled the way they did when I first arrived. I stepped down the marble stairs into the fading evening light. My heart lightened as though I had just returned a coat that never fit me. A coat I had worn for 5 years, only to find it had stained my dignity. I hadn't yet reached the last step when a car pulled up at the estate's gates. The driver opened the door, and stepping out was Parker Sanders. But before I tell you what Parker was about to do, let me ask you, where are you watching this story from? Don't forget to leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe, because what he does next will change everything. Parker wore a charcoal gray suit, a neatly knotted pale gray silk tie, and held a small gift box in hand. I froze, and he looked momentarily surprised, then chuckled. Brooklyn? Didn't expect to see you here. Before I could answer, Raylan's voice rang out behind me. Mr. Sanders! She hurried over, suddenly all smiles, as if one well-timed handshake could erase everything that had just happened. We're honored to have you this evening. Jeremiah joined her, face calculating, but Parker didn't look at them. He kept his eyes on me. She just helped me fix my car on the highway, he said, unaware of the tension thick in the air. My Rolls-Royce had a busted water pump. She diagnosed it and had it patched in under 90 minutes. Raylan froze, her smile stiff. Jeremiah glanced at me but said nothing. I offered to pay her, Parker continued, but she refused, just said, helping someone is enough. Honestly, I've never met anyone as skilled and kind as she is, especially in a situation where no one was obligated to be kind. The atmosphere shifted. A few guests started paying attention. Raylan tried to smile, though her mouth twitched. Yes, Brooklyn is very independent, though sometimes, perhaps a little too different from the family culture. Parker looked up at Raylan, his voice not loud, but every word struck a nerve. Difference isn't a flaw. The way you and Mr. Jeremiah looked at her earlier wasn't difference. It was disdain. Raylan rushed in, voice nervous. We only want what's best for our son, and Brooklyn hasn't exactly been the right fit. I clenched my fists but didn't turn away. Mr. Sanders, I said, breaking the silence for the first time, you should know. Just minutes ago, I was told I didn't belong with people just because I fix cars and haven't had a child after 5 years of marriage. Every sound stopped. Even the soft music from the quartet seemed swallowed by the silence. Parker turned to Raylan, disappointment radiating from his eyes. I once thought you were someone who could see people for who they are. Turns out you only see brand names and handbag labels. He turned to Jeremiah. And you expect me to invest millions in a company that sells family values at its core while allowing your wife to say such things? Raylan opened her mouth to speak, but Parker raised a hand. No need to explain. Either you treat her with the basic respect every person deserves, or I walk out right now and take my investment to someone who values people more than Polish. The banquet hall fell into dead silence. Somewhere, someone dropped a spoon. It rang out like a bell, and I stood there between two worlds. On one side, a man I had only met that morning, yet who treated me with genuine respect, and on the other, those who had called me family for 5 years, yet never once treated me as human. Parker stood tall in the middle of the banquet room, his eyes cool but not angry, his voice steady and clear, like he was addressing a boardroom. If a woman like Brooklyn, who had the decency to stop on a highway, kneel in the heat, and fix a stranger's car, gets insulted for not wearing the right dress, for not having a child on schedule, or for working in the wrong profession, then I'm sorry. But this is not the kind of family I want to invest in. Raylan stood frozen. Jeremiah opened his mouth to speak, but Parker pointed directly. You see, I don't invest in properties. I invest in people. And the way your family treated someone like Brooklyn speaks volumes about the character you try so hard to hide behind pressed suits. Jeremiah flushed red, while Raylan clutched her purse like it could preserve the last shreds of dignity. A relative stepped in, trying to smile. Surely, this is all just a misunderstanding, Mr. Sanders. But Parker cut him off, polite but firm. I'm not mistaken. I heard, I saw, and I trust my instincts. The room buzzed with a heavy silence. There were no screams, no fights. Just the tense hush of powerful people realizing the balance had shifted. Raylan looked at me, and for the first time I saw fear in her eyes. Jeremiah moved closer to Parker, voice low. We sincerely apologize. If something was out of line, surely it can be discussed. But Parker shook his head. Apologies don't erase what I witnessed, and unfortunately, what I saw wasn't a misstep. It was the truth. He turned to me, his tone softening. Brooklyn, you did what many in this room would never dare. You stood up while being humiliated, and kept your kindness intact. Then he faced Jeremiah, Raylan, and the gathered stakeholders. I hereby withdraw from the deal with Thompson Construction. I cannot place trust or money in people who devalue human dignity, and I need no further explanations. Leaving stunned silence behind, Parker turned and walked out of the banquet hall. And I, for the first time in all my years as a Thompson daughter-in-law, no longer bowed my head. I followed behind him, not looking back. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need anyone to reach for my hand. All I needed was self-respect, fully returned by a man who owed me nothing, but simply chose to stand for what was right. When I stepped out onto the marble landing, the cool breeze brushed across my face, lifting stray strands of hair from my forehead. I stood still for a few seconds, then took out my phone and switched it to silent mode. I didn't text Nathan. I didn't tell him what had just happened. Maybe part of me wanted to preserve what little peace remained in a marriage already marked by distance. But I knew the truth would find its way. And it did. Later that evening, a cousin of Nathan's called him and told him everything, from beginning to end. I didn't take the call. But inside, I knew. I was no longer the girl who stood behind the door, enduring it all in silence. I had stood tall, and walked away from a place that once tried to choke me with etiquette and reputation. That evening, after leaving the Thompson estate, I didn't go straight home. I sat quietly in my truck, feeling every heartbeat still pounding in my chest like the aftershock of a storm. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Parker. "If you haven't had dinner, would you like to grab something light? I know a small place near Bethesda. Simple, but good and quiet." I looked at the message and smiled. 15 minutes later, we were sitting across from each other at a small eatery tucked deep within a tree-lined street shaded by old oak trees. The wooden tables and chairs were worn, the lights warm and gentle, and the smell of toasted bread mingled with soft jazz playing from a vintage radio at the cashier's counter. No one looked at me with judgment. No one cared that my dress was stained with oil or that my hands still bore ink from the garage. We ordered 2 bowls of black bean soup, a simple salad, and 2 glasses of water. No wine, no rituals. Just 2 people quietly trying to find balance again after an evening of too many collisions. "I used to think I was good at reading people," Parker said, stirring his glass gently. "But I once invested in people with top MBAs who spoke like leadership manuals and behind the scenes treated their staff like dirt." He looked at me. "And you didn't say much. You just did the right thing, quietly. That's what made me want to relearn how to see people." I blushed slightly and bowed my head in thanks. "I don't think I'm special. I just don't want to become the kind of person I used to fear." We sat in silence for a few minutes. Then I told him about the day I first learned to fix cars. How the boys in the shop called me the grease-stained princess because I was the only woman. Parker laughed, saying he'd once been mockingly called the old crank by junior staff for insisting they write reports by hand, to feel the words. The more we talked, the more I realized, behind the suit was a father who had lost his wife early, who'd had too many dinners alone, and often drove aimlessly after work just to ease the emptiness. And he realized, behind the old pickup and grease-streaked hands was a woman who'd learned to stand her ground for years, even when no one stood beside her. We didn't talk about money. We didn't talk about contracts. We just talked about the things society tends to dismiss as small: kindness, decency, and doing what's right, even when you're the only one doing it. When we left the restaurant, he opened the truck door for me, an old habit of courtesy. Before I got in, he looked at me, eyes sincere and relieved. "You know, today was a terrible day in the eyes of those at Argyle, but for me, it reminded me something good still exists." I smiled. "I think so too." We didn't name what this connection was. No labels were needed. But I knew. Between us, something had been built from real respect, something I hadn't had in my own family for years. A friendship that was unforced, uncalculated, just 2 people choosing to see and hear each other exactly as they are. We stayed a few minutes more after the bill was paid, our water glasses nearly empty, but the conversation continued, quiet and steady, like truths that don't need to be shouted to be heard. Parker leaned on the table, looking toward the window where the street lamp softly reflected onto the scratched wood. "I once lost a major deal because I misjudged a person," he said, voice calm and deep. "I had invested in a company with flawless structure and immaculate profit reports, but 3 months later, I found out they paid their janitors below minimum wage and trapped employees in legal loopholes to avoid responsibility. That was when I realized, a business can be built from nothing, but a person, if lacking in character, can't be fixed by anything else." He slowly spun a coffee spoon, eyes no longer on me, but somewhere far back along a long road. Character doesn't show up on resumes. It shows when no one's watching, when there's nothing to gain. And tonight you were the only one who acted for the right reasons, not for credit, not to impress. I quietly said, "I don't think they'll change. I think by tomorrow they'll be hosting parties with other guests, forging more curated relationships, and issuing apologies that only exist on paper." He nodded slightly. "True. The Thompson family will survive. They have assets, connections, infrastructure, but You'll go farther. I turned to look at him. He didn't smile, but his eyes glowed, steady. You don't have to go fast. You don't need the elevator of prestige, but every step you take will have roots, from values others only hang on their office walls like slogans. And that is the greatest advantage you can have in this world. I sat in stillness, not because of flattery, but because of the unconditional trust he placed in me. Not as an investor assessing a candidate, but as a human, recognizing another human. I don't know where I'm going yet. I just know I don't want to live in that cycle of silence and endurance anymore. Parker nodded. Then you've already begun. Outside, the night wind whispered through the branches, so soft it was barely audible. But inside me, something had broken free from that old fear. Something like belief, small but real, strong enough to lift me from the table and move me forward, with a straighter back and a lighter heart than I'd known in years. The next morning, as the first light crept through the window curtains, I woke up in a familiar apartment, with an unfamiliar feeling inside, not because the place had changed, but because for the first time in years, I no longer felt I had anything to prove. On my phone was a message from a contact saved as PS, just a short, plain line that made me pause for a few minutes before replying, "Thank you for reminding me that there are still kind people in the world." I wrote back, "Thank you for seeing it." No emojis, no punctuation, just two people from two different worlds who'd tuned into the same frequency and chose to stay connected, not for gain, but for belief. That afternoon, while I was changing oil on an old pickup at the garage, I got a call from Nathan's cousin, Jenna. Her voice was soft, tinged with both hesitation and seriousness. "Brooke, you don't have to explain, but Nathan knows everything that happened last night." My hand froze. The wrench clattered into the metal tray. "Who told him?" I asked, heart sinking. "Your dad. He was at the party. Saw it all, and he told Nathan. Every detail." I stayed silent. A part of me wanted Nathan to know, but not like this. I wasn't ready to tell him myself, not because I didn't want to, but because I feared. He'd just stay silent like all the times before. But this time, he didn't. That evening, when Nathan returned, he didn't say anything at first. He quietly set his suitcase down in the corner, then sat next to me, while I was folding stained shop towels, something I always did when my heart was still unsettled. "I called my parents," Nathan said, voice low but firm. "I asked for a meeting, tomorrow, 7 p.m. at their house." I looked at him and nodded slowly. No questions, no need for preparation. I just knew. If he had chosen to face it, then this time, I wouldn't walk in alone. The next night, we arrived at that same estate, the place where just days ago I had lost my self-worth. The atmosphere in the living room was as cold as the silver-gray color of the walls. Jeremiah sat with legs crossed, expression indifferent. Raylan had her arms folded, her makeup meticulous, but unable to hide the fatigue on her face. Nathan spoke first. He laid out everything that had happened at the party. The insults, the way they humiliated me, and Parker's act of decency. His tone was calm, not yelling, but sharp, like a scalpel peeling away the layers of false decor they'd built for years. But, instead of apologizing, Raylan sighed and turned to me. "If you hadn't been late, hadn't dressed like that, none of this would have escalated." Jeremiah was colder. "And Nathan, you're being too sensitive. Blowing things up only makes everything worse." I thought I would feel angry, hurt, or on the verge of tears. But strangely, I felt calm. No pain, because I no longer had expectations. Raylan's tone shifted, eyes sharpening as usual. "In any case, you were the last one to speak with Mr. Parker. Call him, say something reasonable. The company's in trouble. Other investors are pulling out because he publicly backed out. You owe this family at least that much. I looked at Nathan. He stayed silent, didn't stop her, but didn't defend her either. He let me choose, and I knew it was the most right thing he'd ever done. I turned to Jeremiah and Raylan, my voice soft, but firm. No one deserves to be treated the way you did. No decent investor would trust a family that refuses to own up to its mistakes. I'm not calling him, because the problem isn't Mr. Parker, it's you. We left in silence. No one walked us out. No one tried to stop us. And I knew, this time I didn't walk away in bitterness. I walked away in freedom. 6 months later, a small article in the local business column read, Thompson Construction files for bankruptcy. Bank debt exceeds $8 million. Multiple investors have pulled out, no rescue in sight. I read it on a normal morning, sitting in the garage in my oil-stained uniform, sipping coffee from a chipped ceramic mug. No triumph, no pity, just a quiet clarity. That Parker had been right. Those who live behind facades eventually expose the hollowness underneath, and I had made the right choice, to keep kindness, and let go of what was no longer worth holding on to. The following spring, as the oaks lining the small street where I worked began to green again, I realized something in me was changing too. Not loudly, not in bright bursts, but quietly, like a seed pushing upward from soil once trampled. I still fixed cars every day, still wore oil-stained uniforms, still drank coffee from the chipped mug, still replaced parts on old vehicles customers brought in. But something in my hands had shifted. They no longer trembled at judgment. I no longer bowed my head when asked what I did. I began to recognize the value in what I do, not just because it fed me, but because it taught me how to solve problems, how to be patient, how to face what seemed irreparably broken, and fix it from the root. One Friday afternoon, I was invited to speak at a local technical school, where a group of high school girls were taking a career prep course. The principal said, they need a role model different from what social media shows them. I stood before 15 girls in work jackets, talking about the first time I got motor oil on my face, about the times I was mocked for doing heavy labor as a woman, and about the day I fixed a Rolls-Royce on the highway, not knowing it would steer the course of my own life. When I finished, one girl raised her hand and asked, "Weren't you scared? Standing in front of people who looked down on you?" I answered after a moment of silence, "Yes. But I was more scared of living a life where I never dared to say what needed to be said, never dared to leave a place that made me feel small." That answer, I knew, wasn't just for them. It was for the version of me from years ago. I don't text Parker often anymore, but occasionally, on special days, he sends a short email. "Thinking of you. I hope you've kept that sharp gaze and soft heart." I read it and smile. As for Nathan, he doesn't try to fix everything from the past, but he stays. He quietly makes dinner every night, listens more, and calls me by simpler, truer names. "You okay? I'm proud of you." Sometimes, that's enough. I no longer live for validation. I live to protect the stillness inside me. It's the kind of peace I once thought I'd never have. But it turns out, when you stand up, even with shaking legs, peace eventually finds its way to you. One quiet weekend afternoon, I stopped by a classic car fair held on a small farm in western Maryland. Not to buy anything, just because I liked the feeling of being among old things that still held their worth, just like me. I walked along rows of cars, 68 Mustangs, Chevy Bel Airs, a few early model Ford pickups lovingly restored. The April sunlight bathed the scene in rare serenity. As I bent over to study the engine of a Camaro, a familiar voice called from behind. "Brooklyn?" I turned. It was Parker. No suit this time, just a light blue shirt, khaki trousers, and a cap with the Rolls-Royce logo. "Here for the cars or the company?" he asked, half joking. I smiled. For the feeling of being near things that don't have to prove anything, They're old, not shiny, but they run. And they're real. He nodded, standing beside me as we both looked at the car. You know, he said, eyes on the silver trim. Some people spend a lifetime chasing perfection, but never learn how to treat a grimy soul with decency. And when it all collapses, they realize kindness was the only thing keeping them upright. I didn't answer right away. I took a deep breath, the breeze lifting my hair, carrying the scent of grass and faint gasoline. I used to think I didn't belong anywhere, I said. But now I understand, as long as you live truthfully, eventually, you'll find people who understand that. Parker smiled. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and handed it to me. You've got oil on your cheek. I laughed and wiped it gently. Thanks. Free kindness again? He teased. No, I said. This time, it's because I care. We didn't say anything more. Just stood there, side by side, like two strangers who met at the right time, did the right thing, and trusted each other enough not to dress it up. On the way home, I opened the door of my pickup, placed my hand on the steering wheel, now more calloused, steadier, and no longer trembling beneath anyone's gaze. The rearview mirror caught the slow-setting sun, and I knew I had reached the end of a journey. I hadn't beaten anyone. I hadn't earned a crown, but I had kept myself intact. And sometimes, that's the greatest victory of all. Brooklyn's story isn't about a showdown of wins and losses. It's about reclaiming dignity in a world that sometimes forgets what true human value looks like. Maybe you've been like her, walking into a room where someone's gaze made you feel smaller. Maybe you've stayed silent for the sake of peace, until it began to harm your spirit. But I hope, after hearing this story, you'll remember. Sometimes it only takes one moment of courage, one time you say, enough, to begin changing the rest of your life. If you've been through something similar, share your story in the comments below, because someone out there might need a reason to believe they're not alone. And if you still believe kindness is worth holding on to, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need to hear this most. Thank you for your time. See you in another story, where we'll keep learning how to be strong without losing our softness.